The unforgiving Arizona sun beat down on Marigold Reed's tear-stained face as she stood on Yuma's dusty Main Street, clutching the remnants of her dreams in a crumpled letter. It was 1878, and at 22, she had just received word that the teaching position she'd applied for had been denied, the third such rejection in as many months. "You simply aren't enough, Miss Reed," the station master had said with casual cruelty as he'd handed her the letter. "A woman with your background could never properly educate the children of Yuma." His words merely echoed what she'd heard her entire life from her father, from former suitors, from the society that had never accepted the daughter of a laundress and a failed prospector. Marigold wiped her eyes with her handkerchief, squared her shoulders, and made her way toward Widow Perkins' boarding house. She had exactly $3.27 to her name, enough for perhaps another week's lodging. After that, she didn't know what would become of her. Perhaps her mother had been right. Perhaps she should have accepted Mr. Holloway's proposal, despite his wandering eyes and his tendency to drink away his earnings. The evening brought little relief from the heat. Marigold sat on the small bed in her rented room, her few possessions arranged neatly around her. Beneath the thin pillow lay her most prized possession, a dog-eared copy of Pride and Prejudice that had belonged to her mother. On the inside cover, in her mother's delicate handwriting, was the inscription, "To my dearest Marigold, may you find a love that sees your true worth." A bitter laugh escaped her lips. How was she supposed to find love when she couldn't even find employment? She had traveled all the way from Boston with such hope, such determination to make something of herself in this wild frontier town. Sleep came fitfully that night. When dawn broke, Marigold dressed in her best and only presentable dress, a faded blue cotton with lace at the collar that she had mended so many times the original fabric was barely visible in places. Today, she would try the saloon. It wasn't the respectable position she had hoped for, but serving drinks would pay for food and lodging. The Golden Nugget Saloon stood at the far end of Main Street, its weathered facade a testament to the harsh desert climate. A freshly painted sign hung crookedly above the swinging doors. Marigold paused, gathering her courage before pushing through. The interior was dark after the bright morning sun, and it took a moment for her eyes to adjust. A few early patrons nursed drinks at scattered tables. Behind the bar, a portly man with an impressive mustache polished glasses with a questionable-looking rag. "Excuse me, sir," Marigold said, approaching the bar with what she hoped was a confident stride. "I understand you might be in need of serving girls." The bartender looked her up and down, his expression unreadable. "You ever worked a saloon before, miss?" "No, sir, but I'm a quick learner and not hiring," he cut in, turning back to his glasses. "Please," Marigold persisted. "I'll work hard. I'll take any shift." "Listen, lady," the bartender sighed, setting down his glass with a thud. "This ain't no place for proper ladies. The girls who work here ain't just serving drinks, if you catch my meaning. Now scoot before you get your reputation tarnished just by standing here." Marigold's cheeks burned as she backed away, bumping into a table and causing the men seated there to look up with interest. She mumbled an apology and hurried toward the exit, tears threatening to fall once more. In her haste, she collided with a solid form entering the saloon. Strong hands steadied her, and she found herself looking up into the most piercing blue eyes she'd ever seen. They belonged to a tall man dressed in trail-worn clothes, his face partly shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. "Whoa there, miss," he said, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to reverberate through her. "You all right?" I'm sorry," she stammered, pulling away from his grasp. "I wasn't looking where I was going." Those blue eyes studied her face, noting the unshed tears and flushed cheeks. Seems to me like you're in a hurry to get away from something. Or someone. Before she could respond, the bartender called out, "Levy, about time you showed your ugly mug around here." The man Levy kept his eyes on Marigold for a moment longer before turning to acknowledge the bartender. "Just got back into town, Pete. Herd settled at the north pasture." Marigold seized the opportunity to slip past him and out into the street, gulping in the fresh air as if she'd been submerged underwater. She hurried down the boardwalk, mortification making her steps quick and uneven. One more door closed. One more reminder that she didn't belong. As she rounded the corner toward the general store, her next stop in what was beginning to feel like a futile job search, she heard footsteps behind her. "Miss, hold up a minute." It was him, the cowboy from the saloon. "Levy." Marigold hesitated, then stopped, turning to face him. He slowed his pace as he approached, as if concerned about frightening her. "I didn't mean to startle you back there," he said, removing his hat to reveal sun-lightened brown hair. "Name's Levy Landry. I run the Double L Ranch about 10 miles north of town." "Marigold Reed," she replied automatically, years of proper Boston upbringing taking over. "And you didn't startle me, Mr. Landry. I was just in a hurry." A slight smile crossed his tanned face. A hurry to get away from Pete's suggestion about the kind of work available at the Golden Nugget. Marigold's blush deepened. "You overheard that." "Pete's not known for his subtlety," Levy said, his expression turning serious. "Look, Miss Reed, I couldn't help noticing you seem to be looking for work. If you don't mind my asking, what brings you to Yuma? Not exactly a common destination for a lady on her own." Something about his direct but kind manner made Marigold answer honestly. "I came to take a teaching position, but the school board, they decided I wasn't suitable." "Not suitable?" Levy frowned. "Why in tarnation not? They said a woman with my background couldn't possibly educate their children properly." The words came out more bitterly than she'd intended. Levy's frown deepened. "Your background?" Marigold lifted her chin slightly. "My father was a prospector who lost everything in the California gold rush. My mother took in laundry to support us. I was educated through the charity of my mother's employer. Apparently, such humble beginnings make me unworthy of shaping young minds." Levy looked at her for a long moment, those blue eyes seeming to see straight through to her soul. "That's the most backward thing I've heard, and I've heard plenty." His indignation on her behalf was unexpectedly warming. Marigold offered a small smile. "Thank you, Mr. Landry, but that doesn't change my current predicament. I need to find work, and quickly." Levy settled his hat back on his head, his expression thoughtful. "As it happens, Miss Reed, I might have a proposition for you." "Proper work," he added hastily when her eyebrows rose. "My ranch cook quit on me last week, headed to California, and I've got my young niece living with me since my sister passed last winter. Girl's 8 years old and growing wilder by the day with no proper schooling." "Are you offering me a position as both cook and tutor?" Marigold asked, hardly daring to hope. "That'd be the long and short of it," Levy nodded. "Room and board plus $30 a month. It's honest work, Miss Reed, though I won't lie to you, ranch life ain't easy. We're 10 miles out of town, weather gets fierce, and the work never ends." It was more money than she'd expected to make, and the prospect of teaching, even if just one child, made her heart leap. Still, caution made her hesitate. "Why would you offer such a position to a complete stranger, Mr. Landry?" Levy's eyes crinkled at the corners. "I'm a fair judge of character, Miss Reed. You've got honest eyes. Besides, anyone who quotes Shakespeare when they think no one's listening can't be all bad." Marigold blinked in surprise. Had she been reciting to herself again? It was an old habit when she was upset. "Well," Levy prompted. "What do you say? "Lucy, that's my niece. She needs someone like you. And I reckon you need somewhere to be that appreciates what you bring to the table." It was reckless, perhaps, to accept a position from a man she'd just met, to agree to live miles from town on a ranch she'd never seen. And yet, something in those clear blue eyes made Marigold trust Levy Landry. "I accept your offer, Mr. Landry," she said, extending her hand formally. His large, calloused hand enveloped hers in a gentle but firm grip. "Call me Levy, Miss Reed. Everyone does." "Then you must call me Marigold," she replied, feeling a strange flutter in her chest at the way his name sounded on her lips. "Marigold," he repeated, as if testing the sound. "Like the flower, suits you." His gaze lingered on her golden brown hair. "I'll be heading back to the ranch tomorrow morning. Can you be ready by then?" "I'll be ready," she promised. And just like that, Marigold Reed's fortunes had changed. As she watched Levy Landry stride back toward the saloon, she felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time: hope. The next morning dawned clear and already hot. Marigold had paid her bill at the boarding house and packed her meager belongings into her single trunk. She was waiting on the porch when a wagon pulled up, driven by Levy Landry. He looked even more imposing in the morning light, his broad shoulders and strong arms a testament to years of hard physical labor. "Morning, Miss Reed," he called, jumping down from the wagon. "Good morning, Mr. Landry Levy," she corrected herself. He smiled, and Marigold was struck by how it transformed his face, softening the hard edges and making him appear younger. "Ready for your new adventure?" "As ready as I'll ever be," she replied, trying to hide her nervousness. Levy loaded her trunk into the back of the wagon with ease, then helped her up onto the seat. His hand lingered on hers a moment longer than strictly necessary, and Marigold felt that strange flutter again. The journey to the Double L Ranch took nearly 3 hours. As they traveled, Levy pointed out landmarks and shared stories about the area. He'd come to Arizona Territory 10 years earlier, he explained, working as a cattle driver before saving enough to buy his own modest spread. Over time, he'd built it into a respectable operation with a small herd of cattle and a few horses. "My sister Emily and her husband worked the place with me until the fever took them both last winter," he said, his voice growing somber. "Left little Lucy with no one but me, and I'm the first to admit I don't know the first thing about raising a girl." "I'm very sorry for your loss," Marigold said softly. "It must be difficult for both you and Lucy." Levy nodded, his jaw tightening. "She barely speaks anymore. Used to be the chattiest little thing you ever saw. Now she just exists. That's partly why I wanted to find a woman who could teach her. Thought maybe it might bring some of that spark back." The responsibility of that expectation settled heavily on Marigold's shoulders. "I'll do my best with her, Levy. I promise you that." As they crested a small rise, the Double L Ranch came into view. It was larger than Marigold had expected, a substantial main house built of sturdy logs, a large barn, several corrals, and a bunkhouse off to one side. In the distance, cattle grazed on the sparse but sufficient grasses of the high desert. "It's not much compared to what you might be used to back east," Levy said, suddenly seeming almost self-conscious. "But it's home." "It's beautiful," Marigold said truthfully. After the cramped tenement where she'd grown up in Boston, the open space and solid buildings seemed like luxury indeed. As the wagon pulled up to the main house, the door swung open and a small figure appeared. Lucy Landry was thin and pale, her dark hair hanging in 2 untidy braids. She watched their approach with solemn eyes that seemed too old for her young face. "Lucy," Levy called, bringing the wagon to a halt. "Come meet Miss Reed. She's going to be staying with us, cooking and teaching you your letters and numbers." Lucy said nothing, merely regarding Marigold with unconcealed suspicion. "Hello, Lucy," Marigold said gently. "I'm very pleased to meet you." Still no response. The little girl turned and disappeared back into the house. "I told you she doesn't talk much," Levy sighed, jumping down and coming around to help Marigold. "Don't take it personal." "I don't," Marigold assured him, though the cool reception stung slightly. "She's been through a terrible loss. These things take time." Levy's hands were warm at her waist as he lifted her down from the wagon. For a brief moment, they stood close enough that Marigold could smell the clean scent of soap and sunshine that clung to him. "Thank you for understanding," he said quietly, then stepped back, clearing his throat. "Let me show you to your room, and then I can give you a tour of the place." The interior of the house was surprisingly well kept, if sparse. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall. A hallway led to 3 bedrooms, the largest belonging to Levy, a smaller one to Lucy, and the third, now Marigold's, had clearly been a storeroom recently cleared for her arrival. "It's not much," Levy said apologetically as he set her trunk down in the small room. A narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a small table with a basin completed the furnishings. "It's perfect," Marigold assured him. "Truly." The tour of the ranch revealed a well-organized operation. Besides Levy, there were 3 cowhands who lived in the bunkhouse: Hank, an older man with a white beard and weather-worn face; Miguel, a skilled horseman from south of the border; and Caleb, a young man barely out of his teens who had the look of someone running from a troubled past. "The men take their meals here in the main house," Levy explained as they returned from the tour. "Breakfast at sunrise, dinner at midday, supper after work's done. Sunday's a day of rest except for essential chores. Lucy helps some with the cooking, but—" He trailed off. "But she's 8 years old," Marigold finished for him. "Don't worry, Levy. I may not be a professional chef, but my mother made sure I knew my way around a kitchen." "I ain't expecting fancy," Levy said. "Just edible." That first evening, Marigold prepared a simple supper of beans, biscuits, and the last of the bacon she found in the larder. The men ate heartily, complimenting her cooking with enthusiasm that suggested they'd been surviving on far worse fare since the previous cook's departure. Lucy picked at her food silently, watching Marigold with those solemn eyes. After the meal, when the hands had retired to the bunkhouse and Lucy had been tucked into bed, Marigold sat with Levy on the porch, the night air cool and sweet after the heat of the day. "Thank you," he said simply, looking out at the starlit landscape. "For what? For coming here. For taking a chance on us." He turned to look at her, his expression serious. "I know it couldn't have been an easy decision." Marigold smiled. "To be honest, I didn't have many options left. But I'm glad I made this one." Levy nodded, seeming satisfied with her answer. "Tomorrow I'll take you into town to stock up on supplies. Anything particular you need for your teaching? Some paper, pencils, a slate if they have one, and perhaps a few books, readers, or simple stories for Lucy." "Consider it done." Levy stood, stretching his tall frame. "Best get some rest. Days start early around here." As Marigold lay in her narrow bed that night, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch, the distant lowing of cattle, the whisper of the wind through the eaves, the occasional call of a night bird, she felt a curious sense of peace. For the first time in months, she had purpose. She had a place. Whether that place would become home, only time would tell. The first week at the Double L Ranch established a rhythm to Marigold's days. She rose before dawn to start breakfast for Levy and the hands, spent the morning trying to coax Lucy into learning her letters, prepared the midday meal, and then used the afternoons for household chores and preparations for supper. It was exhausting work, far more physically demanding than anything she'd done before, but there was satisfaction in it too. Lucy remained withdrawn, answering Marigold's questions with nods or shakes of her head, occasionally writing her responses on the slate they'd purchased in town. She was bright, though, picking up new concepts quickly when she chose to engage. Levy kept his distance during the day, busy with the endless tasks of running the ranch. But in the evenings, after Lucy was in bed, he and Marigold would sit on the porch and talk. He told her stories of his childhood in Missouri, of his journey west as a young man, of his dreams for the ranch. In turn, she shared tales of Boston, of her mother's gentle wisdom, of the books that had transported her beyond her humble circumstances. On the 10th day during their morning lesson, Lucy finally spoke. "My mama used to read to me," she said, her voice rusty from disuse. Every night before bed. Marigold, who had been demonstrating how to form the letter R, froze in surprise, then carefully controlled her expression. "Did she? What sorts of stories did she read?" "Fairy tales," Lucy said, her fingers tracing the edge of her slate. "About princesses and knights and dragons." "I love fairy tales," Marigold said softly. "Perhaps we could find some for us to read together." Lucy looked up, meeting Marigold's eyes directly for the first time. "Would you read to me, like my mama did?" "I would be honored to," Marigold replied, feeling a lump form in her throat. That evening after dinner, Marigold read Cinderella from a tattered volume of Grimm's fairy tales she'd found in Yuma's small general store. Lucy sat close beside her on the sofa, her small body gradually relaxing as the story unfolded. Levy, ostensibly reviewing ledgers at the table, watched them with an expression Marigold couldn't quite decipher. When the story concluded and Lucy had been tucked into bed, Marigold found Levy waiting for her on the porch, a cup of coffee in his hands. "She spoke to me today," Marigold said, unable to keep the excitement from her voice. Levy's smile was slow and warm. "I heard. First time since the funeral." "She misses her mother terribly," Marigold said, sitting beside him. "The reading seems to comfort her." "You're good with her," Levy said, his voice rough with emotion. "I've been so worried about her, and in just 10 days you've done what I couldn't in 6 months. You've given her stability and love," Marigold countered. "I'm just building on the foundation you laid." Levy looked at her then, his blue eyes intense in the lamplight spilling from the window. "You're something special," Marigold raved. "Don't let anyone tell you different." The sincerity in his voice made her breath catch. For a moment she thought he might reach for her hand, might say something more. But the moment passed, and they lapsed into comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge in the vast Arizona sky. The days lengthened into weeks, and Marigold settled further into ranch life. Lucy began speaking more, at first just with Marigold during their lessons, and then gradually with Levy and the hands as well. The child's personality emerged bright, curious, and with a stubborn streak that reminded Marigold of Levy. One morning in late July, as Marigold was kneading dough for the day's bread, Lucy came running into the kitchen, excitement written across her face. "Miss Reed, Uncle Levy says there's to be a social in town on Saturday for Independence Day, and we're all going. There'll be dancing and games and fireworks." Marigold smiled at the girl's enthusiasm. "That sounds wonderful, Lucy. Will you wear your prettiest dress? Uncle Levy says he's going to wear his good boots, the ones without manure on them." Lucy's eyes sparkled with mischief. "I suppose I could wear my blue dress," Marigold mused, mentally cataloging her limited wardrobe. Lucy's face fell slightly. "But you always wear that one to church." It was true Marigold's sole good dress, had become familiar to the small congregation that gathered in Yuma's modest church each Sunday. She had never felt its inadequacy as keenly as she did now, seeing Lucy's disappointment. "Well, perhaps I could add a new ribbon or we could make you a new dress," Lucy exclaimed, bouncing on her toes. "Mrs. Finley in town has fabric and patterns. Uncle Levy would buy it for you, I know he would." "Oh, Lucy, that's very sweet, but I couldn't possibly ask Levy to ask me what?" Levy's deep voice came from the doorway where he stood removing his hat. His face was flushed from the heat outside, his shirt clinging to his broad chest with sweat. "Uncle Levy." "Miss Reed needs a new dress for the social," Lucy said before Marigold could stop her. "Her blue one is nice, but she wears it every Sunday and a social is special." Levy's eyes moved to Marigold, taking in her flour-dusted apron and the flush of embarrassment on her cheeks. "Is that so?" "Lucy, really, it's not necessary," Marigold began, but the little girl was already tugging at her uncle's sleeve. "Please, Uncle Levy. Miss Reed makes us nice food every day and teaches me all kinds of things. Doesn't she deserve something pretty?" A slow smile spread across Levy's face. "Can't argue with that logic, Lucy girl." He turned to Marigold. "We're heading into town tomorrow for supplies anyway. Why don't you pick out whatever you need for a new dress? Consider it a bonus for all your hard work." "That's very generous, but no buts," Levy said firmly. "Lucy's right. You deserve something pretty." The way he looked at her as he said it, a warm appreciation in his eyes, made Marigold's protests die on her lips. "Thank you," she said instead. "That's very kind." Later that evening, after Lucy had gone to bed, Marigold found Levy on the porch in his usual spot. "You didn't have to do that," she said, settling into the chair beside his. "About the dress," Levy shrugged. "Didn't do it because I had to." "Still, it's an extravagance, Marigold," he interrupted, turning to look at her directly. "In the 2 months you've been here, you've transformed this house." Lucy's talking again, smiling again. "The men's morale is higher than it's been in a year, mostly because they're eating better than they ever have. And me." He paused, seeming to search for words. "Well, let's just say the ranch feels like home again, not just a place to work. So if you want a new dress, hell, if you want 10 new dresses, it'd still be less than what you're worth to the double L." Marigold felt warmth spread through her at his words. "Thank you," she said softly. "That means a great deal to me." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the night sounds of the ranch wrapping around them. Finally, Levy spoke again. "There's something else, Marigold, something I've been meaning to tell you." There was an uncharacteristic hesitancy in his tone that made her turn to look at him. "What is it?" "I got a letter last week from the school board in Yuma." He shifted in his chair, looking uncomfortable. "Seems their new teacher backed out at the last minute. They're desperate to fill the position before the school year starts in September." Marigold's heart began to race. They want me to apply again," Levy nodded. "Mr. Grayson, he's head of the board, he approached me after church last Sunday. Said they'd heard good things about your work with Lucy. Said they'd be willing to reconsider your application." "I see." Marigold's mind whirled with conflicting emotions. The teaching position had been her dream, the reason she'd come to Yuma in the first place. And yet, "It's what you wanted," Levy said quietly. "The reason you came out here." "Yes," Marigold agreed, staring out at the darkened landscape. "It was." She turned to look at him, finding his gaze already fixed on her face, searching. "I've come to love it here," she admitted. "The ranch, Lucy. All of it." Something flickered in Levy's eyes, hope perhaps, or relief. "You'd consider staying then? Even with the teaching position available?" "I would," Marigold said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "If you still want me here." Levy's hand moved across the space between their chairs, finding hers and enveloping it in his warm grip. "I want you here, Marigold, more than I probably should." The admission hung in the air between them, charged with unspoken meaning. Marigold's breath caught as Levy's thumb traced small circles on the back of her hand. "The social on Saturday," he said, his voice lower now. "Would you do me the honor of saving me a dance?" "I'd like that," Marigold replied, her own voice barely above a whisper. They sat together in the gathering darkness, hands entwined, neither willing to break the spell of the moment. And for the first time since she could remember, Marigold Reed felt like she might be exactly where she belonged. The town of Yuma was transformed for the Independence Day celebrations. Red, white, and blue bunting draped the fronts of buildings, and the town square had been cleared for dancing. Tables laden with food lined one side, and children darted about, their excitement palpable in the warm evening air. Marigold smoothed down the skirt of her new dress, a lovely creation in deep green calico with white lace trim. She had worked on it feverishly for the past 3 days, using a pattern purchased from Mrs. Finley and staying up late into the night to finish the final stitches. The result was worth the effort. The color brought out the golden flecks in her brown eyes, and the cut flattered her slender figure in a way her old blue dress never had. Lucy skipped beside her, resplendent in a yellow dress that had been her mother's, altered by Marigold to fit her small frame. Ahead of them, Levy walked with the ranch hands, cutting an impressive figure in his best clothes, dark trousers, a crisp white shirt, and a black vest. His boots were indeed free of manure, polished to a shine that caught the light of the lantern strung around the square. "Doesn't Uncle Levy look handsome?" Lucy whispered, her eyes dancing with mischief. "And he keeps looking back at you, Miss Reed." Marigold felt her cheeks warm. It was true Levy had been stealing glances at her since they'd left the ranch, his eyes widening appreciatively when he'd first seen her in the new dress. "Your uncle always looks very respectable," Marigold replied diplomatically. Lucy giggled. "Respectable isn't the same as handsome, Miss Reed." "I think you know that." Before Marigold could formulate a response, they reached the town square. The festivities were already underway, with a fiddler and a banjo player providing lively music for dancing. Several couples swirled around the cleared space, ladies' skirts spinning like colorful tops. Marigold, Lucy, Mrs. Finley, the shopkeeper's wife, bustled over to greet them. "Don't you both look lovely? And Marigold, that dress turned out beautifully. I knew that green would suit you." "Thank you, Mrs. Finley," Marigold replied, pleased by the older woman's approval. "You were right about the pattern. Too, it wasn't as complicated as I feared." "Nonsense, girl, you've got a natural talent with a needle. Now, come meet some folks. There's plenty here who have been curious about the woman who's tamed Levy Landry's wild household." As Mrs. Finley led them through the crowd, making introductions, Marigold became increasingly aware of the curious glances and whispered comments that followed her. Most were friendly, but some held a sharper edge, particularly from the unmarried women in town. It wasn't until she overheard a snippet of conversation between 2 older women that she understood why. Living under the same roof, just the 3 of them. Hardly proper, if you ask me. "Well, I heard from Mabel that he's sweet on her. Wouldn't surprise me if there's a wedding before harvest." Marigold's cheeks blazed. She hadn't considered how her position at the Double L might be perceived by the townsfolk. Of course, living in a household with an unmarried man would raise eyebrows, even with a child present, and the suggestion that Levy might have romantic intentions. She looked across the square to where he stood talking with several other ranchers. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up, his eyes finding hers immediately. A slow smile spread across his face, and he tipped his hat slightly in her direction. The simple gesture sent a flutter through Marigold's chest. It was becoming increasingly difficult to deny that her feelings for Levi Landry had grown beyond mere gratitude or friendship. The question was, did he feel the same? Or was she seeing what she wished to see? Miss Reed. Lucy tugged at her hand. "Can I go play with Sarah and Emma? They're having a sack race over by the church." Pulled from her thoughts, Marigold smiled down at the eager girl. "Of course, Lucy. Just don't want her too far." As Lucy darted off to join her friends, Marigold felt a presence at her elbow. Turning, she found Levi standing beside her, his hat in his hands. "You look beautiful," he said without preamble, his eyes warm as they took in her appearance. "Thank you," Marigold replied, feeling suddenly shy. "You look very handsome yourself." A pleased smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. "Mrs. Finley been keeping you busy with introductions?" "Yes, though I think I've forgotten half the names already. There are so many people here." "Whole county comes out for the Independence Day social," Levi nodded. "Only happens once a year, after all." The music changed then, shifting to a slower, sweeter melody. Couples moved closer together on the makeshift dance floor. Levi cleared his throat. "You promised me a dance, Miss Reed. I'm hoping you'll make good on that now." Marigold felt a flutter of nerves. "I should warn you, I'm not much of a dancer. Boston tenements don't provide much opportunity for learning." "Then we'll be well matched," Levi said with a smile. "Cattle don't make the best dance partners either." He offered his arm, and Marigold placed her hand lightly upon it, allowing him to lead her to the edge of the dancing area. His hand settled at her waist, warm and steady, while the other clasped hers gently. They began to move in time to the music, their steps hesitant at first, then finding a shared rhythm. "See, not so difficult," Levi murmured, his face close to hers. "Only because you're a better dancer than you let on," Marigold replied, looking up at him, his blue eyes crinkled at the corners. "Maybe I just have the right partner." The simple compliment warmed Marigold more than the summer evening. As they continued to dance, the rest of the gathering seemed to fade away, until it felt as though they were alone under the star-filled sky. Levi's hand at her waist drew her imperceptibly closer, and Marigold found herself leaning into his solid strength. "Marigold," Levi said softly, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "There's something I've been wanting to ask you." Her heart skipped a beat. "Yes." But before he could continue, a commotion at the edge of the square drew their attention. Raised voices, then the unmistakable sound of a fist connecting with flesh. The music faltered and stopped. Levi's posture changed immediately, his body tensing as he scanned the crowd. "Stay here," he told Marigold, releasing her and striding toward the disturbance. Marigold, ignoring his instruction, followed after him. A small crowd had gathered around two men, one she recognized as Caleb, the youngest of Levi's ranch hands, and the other a town resident she'd been introduced to earlier in the evening, a man named Fletcher who worked at the bank. "You keep your filthy hands off my sister." Fletcher was shouting, his face red with anger. Caleb was on the ground, blood streaming from his nose. "I didn't do anything wrong," Caleb protested, scrambling to his feet. "Abigail and I were just talking." "Like hell you were." Fletcher lunged forward, but Levi stepped between them, his hands raised. "That's enough, Fletcher," Levi said, his voice calm but carrying authority. "This isn't the time or place." "Stay out of this, Landry," Fletcher snarled. "This is between me and your no-good ranch hand." "Caleb works for me," Levi replied evenly. "That makes it my business. Now, why don't we all calm down?" And Fletcher's swing came without warning, a wild haymaker aimed at Levi's jaw. Levi ducked it easily, then planted his feet and delivered a single, measured punch to Fletcher's midsection. The banker doubled over, gasping for breath. Like I was saying, Levy continued, as if the brief violence had been nothing more than a minor interruption, let's calm down and discuss this like reasonable men. Sheriff Williams pushed through the crowd then, his weathered face set in a frown. What's going on here, Landry? Just a misunderstanding, Sheriff, Levy said. Mr. Fletcher took exception to Caleb speaking with his sister. That right, Fletcher? The sheriff asked, eyeing the banker who was still trying to catch his breath. Fletcher straightened slowly, glaring at Caleb. That drifter was out behind the church with Abigail, getting altogether too friendly. Man like that has no business touching a decent girl. I didn't touch her, Caleb protested. We were just talking, I swear. A young woman pushed forward, then presumably Abigail Fletcher. She was pretty in a delicate way, with fair hair and flushed cheeks. Thomas, you're making a scene over nothing, she said to her brother. Caleb was a perfect gentleman. He was just showing me a constellation. Behind the church, Thomas scoffed. I wasn't born yesterday, Abigail. It's where the view is clearest, Caleb said, his voice steadier now. No lanterns to interfere with seeing the stars. Sheriff Williams sighed heavily. Seems to me this is all a lot of fuss over nothing. Fletcher, why don't you take your sister home? Caleb, maybe stick to stargazing in more public places from now on. The crowd began to disperse, the excitement over. The musicians struck up a new tune and couples returned to dancing. Levy turned to Marigold, who had watched the entire exchange with wide eyes. Sorry about that, he said, running a hand through his hair. Not exactly how I planned this evening going. Are you all right? Marigold asked, scanning his face for any sign of injury. Levy's expression softened. I'm fine. Takes more than a banker to rattle me. He glanced over to where Caleb stood with Hank and Miguel, the older hands clearly giving the young man a piece of their minds. I should probably have a word with Caleb, though. Of course, Marigold nodded, trying to hide her disappointment that their dance and whatever Levy had been about to say had been interrupted. I'll go check on Lucy. Levy caught her hand before she could turn away. Rain, check on that dance. I'd like that, Marigold replied, her spirits lifting at the warmth in his eyes. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of activity. The fireworks display was spectacular, drawing gasps and applause from the gathered townsfolk. Lucy watched with wide-eyed wonder, nestled between Marigold and Levy on a blanket spread at the edge of town. As the last colorful burst faded from the sky, the little girl's head began to droop against Marigold's shoulder. Someone's ready for bed, Levy observed, his voice gentle. Let's head home. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, Lucy asleep in the back of the wagon, covered with Levy's jacket. Marigold and Levy sat side by side on the wagon seat, the night air cool around them. Did you enjoy the social? Levy asked, his eyes on the road ahead. Very much, Marigold replied. It was nice to meet more of the townsfolk. They seemed to take to you, Levy observed. Mrs. Finley was singing your praises to anyone who would listen. Marigold smiled. She's been very kind. They lapsed into comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the creaking of the wagon and the rhythmic clip-clop of the horses' hooves. Finally, Levy spoke again, his voice thoughtful. What I was going to ask you earlier before the fight. It was about the teaching position. Oh. Marigold's heart beat a little faster. The school board is meeting next week to make their final decision. Mr. Grayson asked if you'd be interested in coming in to speak with them. Levy glanced at her, his expression unreadable in the darkness. I told him I'd pass along the message, but that the decision was entirely yours. Marigold considered for a moment. The teaching position had been her dream when she arrived in Yuma. But now, I'm not sure I want it anymore, she admitted softly. Levy's hands tightened on the reins. Why not? It's what you came here for. Things change, Marigold said, choosing her words carefully. People change. What I wanted then isn't necessarily what I want now. And what do you want now, Marigold? Levy's voice was low, almost a whisper. She turned to look at him, finding his eyes already on her face, searching. The answer rose to her lips, simple and true. This. The ranch, Lucy. You. The words hung in the air between them, too honest to take back, too revealing to ignore. For a heart-stopping moment, Marigold feared she had overstepped, had misread the signals she thought she'd been receiving. Then Levy's hand found hers in the darkness, his fingers intertwining with her own. "Good," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Because I don't think I could bear to let you go." The rest of the ride passed in a charged silence, their clasped hands a silent declaration of feelings too new and precious for words. When they reached the ranch, Levy carried the still sleeping Lucy inside while Marigold tended to the horses, a task she had become surprisingly proficient at over the past months. As she brushed down the mare, her mind whirled with the implications of what had just passed between them. Levy wanted her to stay, not just as Lucy's tutor or as the ranch cook, but as something more, something they hadn't quite named yet, but which filled her with both elation and trepidation. By the time she returned to the house, Lucy had been tucked into bed. Levy waited for her on the porch, a lantern casting a warm glow over the weathered boards. "Lucy didn't even stir," he said as Marigold approached. "Must have worn herself out with all the excitement." "It was a big day for her," Marigold agreed, hesitating at the bottom of the porch steps. The dynamics between them had shifted, and she wasn't quite sure how to navigate this new territory. Levy seemed to sense her uncertainty. He rose from his chair and descended the steps to stand before her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Marigold," he began, then paused as if gathering his thoughts. "I'm not a man of many words, especially when it comes to feelings, but I want to be clear about this." His hands reached for hers, engulfing them in his warm grip. "These past months, having you here, it's made me realize how empty the ranch was before, how empty my life was, and I don't want to go back to that." Marigold's heart raced at his words. "I don't want to leave," she said softly. "Not now, not ever." A slow smile spread across Levy's face, transforming his serious features. "Good, because I've grown mighty fond of your biscuits." Marigold laughed, the tension breaking. "Just my biscuits, Mr. Landry," his expression sobered, though his eyes still held warmth. "No, Miss Reed. Not just your biscuits." His hand rose to cup her cheek, his touch gentle. "I've grown fond of your smile, your laugh, the way you are with Lucy, the way you've made this house a home again." Marigold leaned into his touch, her own hand coming up to rest against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. "I've grown fond of you too, Levy, more than I thought possible." Time seemed to slow as Levy bent his head, his intention clear in his eyes. Marigold's lids fluttered closed as his lips met hers in a kiss so gentle it was almost reverent. His arms circled her waist, drawing her closer, and she melted against him, her hands sliding up to his shoulders. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Levy rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that for quite some time," he admitted. "Why didn't you?" Marigold asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Wasn't sure you felt the same way," he replied. "And I didn't want to risk losing you if you didn't." "Well, now you know," Marigold said, a smile curving her lips. "And you're not going to lose me. Promise." His eyes held a vulnerability she'd never seen in him before. "Promise," she affirmed, rising on tiptoe to press another quick kiss to his lips. They stood together in the starlight, the ranch quiet around them, the future stretching out before them like the vast Arizona sky full of possibilities and promise. August brought scorching heat to the Arizona territory. The cattle grew listless, seeking shade wherever they could find it, and the ranch hands worked from dawn until mid-morning, then again from late afternoon until dusk, avoiding the worst of the sun's punishment. For Marigold, the heat was unlike anything she'd experienced in Boston, but she adjusted, learning to complete her heaviest chores in the relative cool of the early morning, and to take advantage of the slight breeze that sometimes stirred in the late afternoon. Her relationship with Levy had blossomed in the weeks since the Independence Day social. Their evenings on the porch had become a treasured ritual, often ending in lingering kisses and whispered conversations. They were careful to keep their growing affection discreet in front of Lucy and the hands, though Marigold suspected everyone on the ranch was well aware of the change between them. Lucy, in particular, seemed delighted by the development. Marigold had caught the girl watching them with a knowing smile on more than one occasion, and once overheard her telling her doll that Uncle Levy is going to marry Miss Reed, and then she'll be my aunt for real. The thought of marriage both thrilled and terrified Marigold. She loved Levy, there was no use denying it to herself anymore, and she believed he loved her too, though neither had spoken the words aloud yet. But marriage was a tremendous step, one that would irrevocably change her life. Was she ready for that responsibility? For the permanence of becoming not just Levy's wife, but Lucy's guardian as well? These thoughts occupied her mind one hot afternoon as she hung laundry on the line behind the house. She was so absorbed in her musings that she didn't notice the approaching rider until he was nearly at the corral. The stranger rode a handsome bay horse and was dressed in city clothes that looked out of place against the rugged landscape. He reined in near the corral and dismounted with the awkward movements of someone unaccustomed to riding. Curiosity piqued, Marigold set down her laundry basket and made her way toward the visitor. As she approached, she could see he was a middle-aged man with spectacles and a neatly trimmed beard. He was mopping his brow with a handkerchief, clearly suffering in the heat. "Good afternoon," Marigold called. "Can I help you?" The man turned, relief evident on his flushed face. "Ah, yes, thank you. I'm looking for Levy Landry. Is this his ranch?" "It is," Marigold confirmed. "I'm Marigold Reed, the—" She hesitated, unsure how to define her role. "I'm the housekeeper and tutor here. Pleased to meet you, Miss Reed. I'm Walter Hammond from the land office in Phoenix." He extended his hand, which Marigold shook briefly. "Mr. Landry is out with the herd at the moment," Marigold explained, "but he should be back before too long. Would you like to wait? I can offer you some water or lemonade." "Lemonade sounds heavenly," Hammond admitted. "It's a fair piece from town, and I'm afraid I'm not much of a horseman." Marigold led him to the porch, where he sank gratefully into a chair while she fetched the lemonade. When she returned with 2 glasses, Hammond had removed his jacket and was fanning himself with his hat. "Thank you kindly," he said, accepting the cold drink. "You're a godsend on a day like this. May I ask what brings you all the way from Phoenix to see Mr. Landry?" Marigold inquired, taking the seat opposite him. Hammond took a long drink before answering. "Water rights, mainly. There's been some dispute over the creek that runs through this property. It also feeds the Miller place to the south, and they've been claiming Landry is diverting more than his share." "That's ridiculous," Marigold said with more heat than she'd intended. "Levy is scrupulously fair about the water. He's even helped the Millers repair their irrigation ditches twice this summer." Hammond's eyebrows rose slightly at her vehement defense. "I see you're well acquainted with the situation, Miss Reed." Marigold felt her cheeks warm. "I take an interest in the ranch's affairs." "Clearly," Hammond said, a note of speculation in his voice. He took another sip of lemonade, then changed the subject. How long have you been at the Double L? Just over 3 months now. And how do you find ranch life? It must be quite different from what you were accustomed to. It is, Marigold acknowledged, but I've come to love it. There's a directness to life here, a realness that I find refreshing. Hammond nodded thoughtfully. I can understand that. I was raised in Boston myself, came west 15 years ago for my health. Never looked back. Boston. Marigold sat up straighter. That's where I'm from. Is that so? Hammond smiled. Small world, Miss Reed. What brought you all the way to Arizona Territory? Marigold was saved from answering by the sound of approaching horses. Levy and Miguel were riding in from the north pasture, their horses kicking up dust in the late afternoon light. That would be Mr. Landry now, Marigold said, rising from her chair. Levy spotted them on the porch and altered course, heading directly for the house. He dismounted in one fluid motion, handing his reins to Miguel with a nod of thanks. As he approached the porch, his eyes found Marigold's first, a small smile touching his lips before he turned his attention to the visitor. Mr. Hammond, Levy said, extending his hand. Didn't expect to see you out this way. Landry, Hammond returned the handshake. Sorry to drop in unannounced. Had some business in Yuma and thought I'd kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Well, you're welcome all the same, Levy said, though Marigold detected a slight wariness in his tone. I see Miss Reed's been taking good care of you. She has indeed, Hammond agreed. Fine housekeeper you found yourself. Something flashed in Levy's eyes, annoyance perhaps at the reductive description of Marigold's role, but his voice remained cordial. Miss Reed is a great deal more than a housekeeper, Mr. Hammond. She's the heart of this place. The simple declaration, spoken so matter-of-factly, made Marigold's breath catch. Levy's eyes met hers briefly, a world of unspoken feeling in their blue depths. I see, Hammond said, looking between them with newfound understanding. Well, I won't take up too much of your time, Landry. As I was explaining to Miss Reed, I'm here about the water dispute with the Millers. Levy's expression hardened. There is no dispute, Hammond. The Millers know damn well, pardon my language. Marigold, they know full well that I've stuck to the agreement. 5 days of creek flow to them, 9 to me, as per the proportional acreage. That's what I figured, Hammond nodded. But I had to come out and see for myself. Official channels and all that. Would you like to see the creek diversion? Levy offered. It's about a mile east. I can take you there now. That won't be necessary, Hammond replied, finishing his lemonade. I already rode out there before coming to the house. Everything appears to be in order, just as you say. I'll be filing my report accordingly. Relief washed across Levy's features. I appreciate that, Hammond. The last thing I need is trouble with neighbors, especially over something as precious as water. Just doing my job, Hammond said, rising from his chair. I should be getting back to town before dark. My wife worries when I'm out in the territories alone. You're welcome to stay for supper, Marigold offered, and we have a spare room if you'd rather start fresh in the morning. Hammond smiled, looking genuinely touched by the offer. That's very kind, Miss Reed, but I've already arranged lodgings in town. Next time, perhaps. He turned to Levy. You've got yourself a fine setup here, Landry, and I don't just mean the ranch. The knowing look that accompanied this statement made Levy's ears redden slightly, but he didn't contradict the implied assessment. Can't argue with that, he said simply. After Hammond had departed, Levy and Marigold stood on the porch watching his retreating figure until he disappeared over a rise in the land. Heart of the place, am I? Marigold asked softly, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Levy turned to her, his expression serious despite the warmth in his eyes. You know you are, have been almost since you arrived. He reached for her hand, his calloused fingers intertwining with her smaller ones. Hammond got me thinking, though, about what people see when they look at us at this arrangement. Marigold's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? I mean that you deserve better than being known as my housekeeper, or even as well, whatever folks might be calling you behind our backs. Levy's brow furrowed as he searched for words. You deserve a proper place here, Marigold, a proper title. Was he saying what she thought he was saying? Marigold's pulse raced, but she kept her voice steady. What kind of title did you have in mind? Levy's eyes softened as they held hers. Wife, he said simply, if you'll have me. Though she had begun to hope for this moment, the reality of it still left Marigold breathless. Levy. I know it hasn't been that long, he hurried on, mistaking her hesitation for doubt, and I'm not exactly a prize catch. I'm just a rancher with dirt under his fingernails and more cattle than cash. But I love you, Marigold Reed, more than I thought it was possible to love another person, and I want to spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you. Tears pricked at Marigold's eyes. Levy Landry, she said, her voice thick with emotion, do you have any idea how much I love you, how much I've come to love this life we're building? You don't have to try to be worthy of me. You already are more than I ever dreamed of. Hope blazed in Levy's eyes. Is that a yes? In answer, Marigold rose on tiptoe, winding her arms around his neck and pressing her lips to his in a kiss that contained all the love and certainty she felt. When they finally parted, both breathless, she whispered against his lips, yes. 1,000 times yes. Levy's smile could have outshone the Arizona sun. He wrapped his arms around her waist and lifted her off her feet, spinning her in a circle that made her laugh with pure joy. Levy, put me down, you'll hurt your back. Not a chance, he grinned, setting her gently back on her feet but keeping his arms firmly around her. You've just made me the happiest man in the territory. A little back pain is a small price to pay. The sound of galloping hooves made them both turn. Lucy was racing toward the house on her pony, her braids flying behind her. She reined in with surprising skill for an 8-year-old and slid from the saddle. Uncle Levy, Miss Reed, did I miss Mr. Hammond? Hank said there was a man from Phoenix here. She bounded up the porch steps, then stopped short, her eyes widening as she took in their embrace and the tear tracks on Marigold's smiling face. Why are you crying? Is something wrong? Levy knelt down to Lucy's level, his face serious but his eyes dancing. Nothing's wrong, Lucy girl. In fact, something's very right. I've asked Miss Reed to marry me. Lucy's eyes grew even wider. Really? What did she say? She said yes, Levy confirmed, his voice solemn despite the grin threatening to break through. Lucy's shriek of delight could probably be heard all the way to Yuma. She launched herself at them both, her thin arms trying to encircle them in a group embrace. I knew it. I knew you loved each other. Does this mean Miss Reed will be my aunt now? Marigold knelt beside Levy, bringing herself to Lucy's height. It means, if you'd like, that I'll be your mother. Not to replace your real mother, she added hastily, but to love you and care for you as she would have wanted. Lucy's eyes filled with tears, but her smile never faltered. I'd like that very much, she whispered, throwing her arms around Marigold's neck. I've wished for it every night since you came. Over Lucy's shoulder, Marigold's eyes met Levy's. The love and gratitude she saw there mirrored her own feelings exactly. Somehow, against all odds, she had found her place in the world not in a schoolroom as she'd originally planned, but on a ranch in the Arizona territory, with a man who saw her true worth, and a child who had claimed a piece of her heart. The wedding took place in early September, when the worst of the summer heat had begun to wane. It was a small affair, held in Yuma's modest church with Reverend Dawson officiating. The entire town turned out for the celebration afterward, which spilled from the church grounds into the street. Marigold wore a gown of ivory silk that Mrs. Finley had helped her order from San Francisco. Lucy, serving as her only attendant, was resplendent in a new dress of pale blue with ribbons in her hair. Levy, looking both uncomfortable and impossibly handsome in a new black suit, had Miguel stand up with him as best man. The vows were simple but heartfelt. When Levy promised to love, honor, and cherish Marigold for all the days of his life, his voice rang with such sincerity that several of the ladies in the congregation dabbed at their eyes. And when Marigold promised the same in return, her clear voice steady and sure, Levy looked at her as if she were the most precious thing he'd ever beheld. "By the power vested in me," Reverend Dawson intoned, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride, Mr. Landry." Levy needed no further encouragement. He gathered Marigold into his arms and kissed her with a tenderness that belied his strength, sealing their vows with a promise that needed no words. The cheers and applause that erupted from the congregation made Lucy giggle and Marigold blush. As they turned to face their friends and neighbors as husband and wife, Marigold caught sight of a figure at the back of the church, Mr. Grayson from the school board, nodding his approval with a slightly rueful smile. She had declined the teaching position, of course, but had offered to help train whoever they hired, a proposal Grayson had gratefully accepted. The celebration lasted well into the evening. There was dancing and feasting, speeches and toasts. Hank, who had consumed perhaps one glass too many of the punch that Miguel had secretly fortified, gave a rambling but heartfelt tribute to the bride and groom that had everyone alternately laughing and wiping away tears. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the town square, Levy found Marigold in conversation with Mrs. Finley. He slipped an arm around her waist, the gesture now his by right as her husband. "Ready to head home, Mrs. Landry," he murmured close to her ear. The sound of her new name sent a thrill through Marigold. "Yes," she replied, smiling up at him. "I'm ready." They had decided against a wedding trip, partly because of the ranch's needs and partly because, as Levy put it, "Why would I want to go anywhere else when everything I want is right here?" Instead, the Hands had promised to keep Lucy at the bunkhouse for the night, giving the newlyweds the house to themselves. As they bid farewell to their guests and prepared to leave, Lucy came running up, her face flushed with excitement from dancing. "Are you leaving now?" she asked, a hint of anxiety creeping into her voice despite her obvious happiness throughout the day. Marigold knelt to embrace her. "Just for tonight, sweetheart. We'll see you tomorrow afternoon. And then we'll all be a real family," Lucy said, her expression serious. "Forever." "Forever," Levy affirmed, ruffling her hair affectionately. "Nothing's going to change that, Lucy girl." After entrusting Lucy to Hank's surprisingly tender care, Levy helped Marigold into the wagon that had been decorated with ribbons and flowers by the townsfolk. As they drove away amid cheers and well wishes, Marigold leaned against her husband's solid shoulder, contentment filling her heart. The ranch was quiet when they arrived, the house dark except for a single lantern left burning on the porch. Levy set the brake and turned to Marigold, his expression suddenly uncertain. "I have something to show you," he said, jumping down from the wagon, "before we go in." Curious, Marigold allowed him to help her down, gathering the skirts of her wedding gown to keep them from the dust. Levy led her not toward the house but around it, to a spot behind the kitchen where a large shape loomed in the darkness. "What is it?" Marigold asked, straining to see in the dim light of the stars. "See for yourself," Levy said, striking a match and lighting a lantern that hung nearby. As light bloomed in the darkness, Marigold gasped. There, nestled against the back of the house, was a small building with a glass window and a freshly painted door. A sign hung above the entrance, the letters carefully formed. Landry School. "Levy," Marigold breathed, turning to him with wide eyes. "What did you do?" "I built you a schoolroom," he said, a hint of nervousness in his voice. "For Lucy, of course, but also. Well, I thought maybe some of the neighboring ranch children might benefit from your teaching. We're too far from town for most of them to attend the Yuma school regularly." Tears welled in Marigold's eyes as the full meaning of his gift sank in. Levy hadn't just given her a building, he'd given her the chance to fulfill the dream that had brought her to Arizona in the first place. He'd seen her disappointment at giving up the teaching position, despite her assurances that she was content with her decision, and had found a way to give her both: the life she had come to love at the Double L and the career she had trained for. "You like it?" Levy asked, misinterpreting her tears. "If it's not what you want, we can." Marigold silenced him with a kiss, pouring all her gratitude and love into the gesture. When they finally parted, both breathless, she whispered, "It's perfect. You're perfect. How did I get so lucky?" Levy's expression softened, his eyes reflecting the starlight. "I'm the lucky one, Marigold, when I think of how close I came to not hiring you that day in town." He shook his head as if the thought was too painful to contemplate. "You were told you'd never be enough, but the truth is you're more than I deserve, more than I ever dreamed of having." "Oh, Levy," Marigold sighed, leaning into his embrace. "We deserve each other. We deserve this happiness." He held her close, his strong arms a haven she had come to rely on. "Yes," he agreed softly. "Yes, we do." The schoolroom was just the first of many surprises that awaited Marigold in her new life as Mrs. Levy Landry. As the seasons changed and the years passed, the Double L Ranch prospered under their joint care. Levy's business acumen, combined with Marigold's organizational skills and innovative ideas, transformed the modest spread into one of the most successful operations in the territory. The Landry School grew as well, eventually serving a dozen children from neighboring ranches. Marigold proved to be as gifted a teacher as she had always believed she could be, instilling a love of learning in her young charges that extended far beyond the basic curriculum. Lucy thrived under their care, growing from a solemn, grief-stricken child into a confident young woman with her uncle's business sense and her aunt's love of literature. When she was 16, she announced her intention to attend college in California, a plan that both terrified and filled her guardians with pride. "She'll be all right," Marigold reassured Levy the night after Lucy's departure on the eastbound train. "We've given her strong roots and wings to fly." Levy, who had been uncharacteristically silent since their return from the station, nodded slowly. "I know, it's just, the house seems so empty without her." Marigold slipped her arms around his waist, resting her head against his chest. "Not for long," she murmured, taking his hand and placing it gently on her still flat abdomen. "We'll have noise enough come spring." The joy that suffused Levy's face at her words was a sight Marigold knew she would remember until her dying day. He swept her into his arms, his laughter filling the house that had once seemed so empty when she first arrived. Their son, Samuel, was born the following April, with Lucy returning from school just in time to welcome her cousin. 2 years later, a daughter joined the family, named Emily after Levy's sister. The children brought a new dimension of joy to the ranch, their laughter and energy infusing every corner of the property with life. Through it all, the triumphs and challenges, the joys and sorrows that make up any life fully lived, Levy and Marigold remained each other's touchstones. Their love, born in the harsh beauty of the Arizona territory, grew deeper and stronger with each passing year, a testament to the truth they had discovered together. That sometimes the person who sees your true worth is the one who helps you see it in yourself. On their 20th anniversary, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson, Levy took Marigold's hand, his fingers still strong despite the years of hard work that had etched lines into his face. "You ever regret it?" he asked softly. "Coming to Yuma, choosing this life?" Marigold leaned her head against his shoulder, her golden brown hair now threaded with silver. "Not for a single moment," she replied, the certainty in her voice as strong as it had been on their wedding day. "This life, this love, it's more than enough. It's everything." Levy's arms tightened around her, his kiss a testament to decades of shared devotion. "You're more than I deserve," he murmured, the words an echo of what he had told her so many years ago. And as the sun slipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fire and shadow, Marigold Reed Landry once told she would never be enough, knew with bone-deep certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be, with the man who had always seen her true worth.